Hello, welcome to my fave fanfics. Here, I post, well, my favorite fanfictions, if that wasn't obvious. I do hope you'll enjoy them as much as I do. Please subscribe and like for more content. Without further ado, let's get started. This is a Bleach x One Piece fanfic called Getsu Tide, by Unseated Fourth on fanfiction.net. Link in the description. Chapter 1. That awkward moment when you think you're an alien. A single moment of carelessness. That was all it had taken for Kurosaki Ichigo's life to go spiraling out of the norm, even more so from which it already had. The day had begun like any other. His father's normal wake-up call, the whole school routine, getting rid of a hollow or two with his recently reawakened Shinigami powers, and all the usual business. However, upon the arrival of sunset, an ordinary, forgettable day would soon transform into a not-so-ordinary, unforgettable night which would once again change Ichigo's life forever. Shit, Ichigo thought, glad to be in his Shinigami form at least. What the hell is he doing here? 50 feet above Karakura town stood none other than Grimmjow Jigerjax, strolling casually through the air with a smug-ass grin. Ichigo, he gloated, striding as though an invisible surface rested beneath his feet. Long time, no see. Why are you here? Ichigo demanded, recalling an image from the last time he'd seen the former Sexta Espada. He had been bleeding in the sands of Hueco Mundo, his prone form practically begging for any passing Jillian to dunk him in their breakfast cereal. When I last saw you, you were like, dead or something. Grimmjow laughed. Ha! You think that would kill me? I've gotten even stronger over the past 2 years. He leapt down from his position in the sky, landing firmly on the ground opposite Ichigo, but that's not why I'm here. I've come to make a compromise with you, Ichigo. But before that, why not a sparring match for old time's sake, hey? Quote. Ichigo watched as Grimmjow withdrew his Zanpakto from its sheath. I won't be going easy on you, Kurosaki, the Urankar promised, prepare to feel firsthand just how strong I've gotten. Quote. Ichigo exhaled. Personality-wise, Grimmjow hadn't changed a bit. A sparring match, was it? That sounded easy enough. He needed a good workout after all. All the recent hollows had been weak, causing him to become lazy in his attacks. He grabbed Zangetsu's hilt from over his shoulder and brandished the massive Zanpakto before his opponent. Your move, he said with a smug grin. Grimmjow didn't need a second urging. With a flash, the former Espada disappeared momentarily. He reappeared almost at the same instant to Ichigo's right. With his ability to sense the sonido, Ichigo used the microsecond warning he had to swivel through the air to avoid the strike and clash swords with his opponent at the pinnacle moment. You've gotten faster, Grimmjow commended him. I could say the same thing, Ichigo responded. The match continued in a series of untraceable flash steps, kicks, pokes and exchanging of blows. Eventually, Ichigo decided to turn the battle up a notch before Grimmjow could get the chance. Getsuga, he began, readying his Zanpakto for its powerful death swing, Tenchua. Quote. Both Urankar and Shinigami paused their brawl for a moment to watch as Ichigo's Zanpakto was oddly flung from its master's hands. In a glorious and spectacular display, it frisbeed through the air and conveniently down into a nearby drain. There was another moment's pause as the two took the time to process what had just occurred. Hey, Ichigo laughed nervously, rubbing the back of his neck as he failed his attempts to feign dignity. One moment, please. What kind of dumbass is careless enough to let go of their Zanpakto? Grimjou's voice chastised after him, but soon faded with distance as Ichigo chased the path Zangetsu had taken. Geez, how far is it going? Ichigo wondered in exasperation, as he continued chasing after the glow of the Zanpakto. It's not meant to be a big sewerage cyst. Quote. It seemed the drainway had suddenly cut off into a deep, sloping ravine, from which Ichigo was swiftly plummeting. So here it is. Urahara Kazuki observed the large garganta he'd constructed in his underground training facility. It was unlike any garganta he'd ever built. Rather than leading through the Dongai to the Soul Society or to Hawako Mundo, it led to an entirely different dimension. And it looked pretty, but the main focus was the different dimension, one he'd only ever had glimpses of. Sure, he'd heard about it, he'd studied it. All dreams were connected after all. He'd been working on the physical aspect for months and now it was nearing completion. Yet looking inside of it, all that could be seen was a seemingly endless ocean of deep azure water. Well, I guess it is predominantly ocean, Kazuki admitted, recalling what he'd seen and knew, although there are a lot of islands, and a ring of land around one of the diagonal hemispheres. I suppose if I do a few more calculations, I can work something out with him and find an island or somewhere to meet. He turned from the garganta to look down on the various study notes he'd made over the years. Maybe if I make a re-evaluation by sometime next week, I'll have to adjust the structure slightly. Maybe if I did this. The sound of something sharp and metallic whizzing at a fast speed from out of a vent in the ceiling almost entered his thoughts, but he didn't register it. But then, Kazuki straightened up. The sound had come from up in the ceiling at first, before becoming increasingly louder as whatever was producing it rocketed closer and closer. It reached its loudest point, before fading out once again as it traveled further away, all so quickly Kazuki almost didn't hear it. That sounded like Kurosaki-kun just now, Kazuki muttered. However, upon looking in the direction of the sound, he saw nothing. I guess I'm getting tired and am starting to hear things, he yawned to himself, closing the garganta. Yoruichi said this would probably happen if I stayed up 5 nights in a row like this. I'll get back to work later. He turned from his workstation and headed back up the ladder into the shop. The sun had just set on a perfect day. Monkey D. Luffy had been watching from his usual perch upon the figurehead of the Thousand Sunny as the world around him slowly dimmed with the absence of the sun, and evening descended. He was contemplating going and doing what he did best, bugging Sanji for food, when something caught his eye. What's that? He wondered at the sight of a figure falling through the sky some 20 meters away, before it splashed into the water. Luffy abruptly stood from his seat and watched the water ripple outwards. A head emerged from the surface, and submerged once again. Someone was out there. Man overboard. Luffy declared loud enough so that his entire crew, and any marine ship within a 5-kilometer radius, would be alerted, before diving into the ocean, intent of rescuing the fallen stranger. Nami swung open the door of her quarters and raced out onto the deck. She'd heard Luffy's shout, but found it odd. Who could they find out in the middle of the ocean and far from any island? Well, stranger things had happened, unless it was one of their own who'd fallen overboard. She neared the front of the ship, to see Sanji, Zoro and Usopp already there. Where's Luffy? Who's overboard? She asked as Chopper scurried out from the infirmary. Don't know, replied Usopp, We just heard Luffy shout that someone was overboard, but then he disappeared. Suppose Luffy is the one who's overboard, suggested Robin, as she descended the staircase and joined them. He called from over here, but I don't see him. If he fell in, he'll be going straight to the bottom. No. Luffy. Chopper cried out as he sprung up onto the rail and prepared to dive overboard to rescue his captain. Sanji grabbed him before he could go any further. Idiot. You're a fruit user, you'd sink too. But Luffy. I'll get him. Zoro sighed as he undid his boots and stepped onto the rail, but it's probably his own fault he's gone overboard. He was about to dive off the ledge, when the thud of someone swinging up onto the opposite rail sounded. Looking for this guy. Quote. The crew, now joined by Frankie and Brooke, turned to see a teenage boy standing upon the side of the ship, his orange hair and strange black robes heavy with seawater. Luffy. Chopper cried out. That's not Luffy. Zoro snapped at the reindeer. No, he's got Luffy. Oh. Their captain was lying limp over the stranger's shoulder. He jumped into the water from your ship. I think he wanted to rescue me or something like that, the orange-haired teen explained, jumping down onto the deck, where he set Luffy down and Chopper worked to remove the water from his lungs, but I ended up having to rescue him. He's a total hammer, someone needs to teach him to swim. That idiot, Nami commented, as Luffy spluttered up the water he'd been digesting. Ah, Sanji. He said, quickly getting to his feet, I was just about to go and find you. I'm hungry. Dumbass. Zoro interrupted, bashing Luffy over the head with a katana sheath. We all heard you shout that someone was overboard. You could have waited for someone who's actually able to swim to dive in and rescue him. Not that he really needed rescuing by the looks of things. 9 pairs of eyes, well 8 actually, since Brooke doesn't really have eyes, yo-ho-ho-ho, skull joke. Turned to focus on Luffy's unknown rescuer. Ah, Ichigo looked on at the 9 figures whose gazes reflected his own. Was that a tanuki? And a long skeleton? Exclamation mark. And that kid he'd just rescued, was he some sort of idiot? Not to mention Ichigo was sure no normal human could stretch the corner of their mouth the way he was currently doing. Well, are you going to tell us who you are, or not? Asked another member of the crew whom Ichigo had his doubts was human. What kind of human half machine after all? I'm Ichigo Kurosaki. That's a funny name, the kid he'd just rescued commented, as he adjusted his straw hat. It's not a funny name. Ichigo retaliated, and who are you? Quote. I'm Luffy, said the straw hat kid as he extended a hand to Ichigo. Nice to meet you, Luffy. Now where the heck are, what? It was then that Ichigo realized that seeing as he and Luffy were standing over a meter apart, Luffy was quite literally extending his hand, well, arm at least. Ichigo had found the absent-minded mouth stretching weird enough, but an arm extending a meter, that just can't be human. I'm a rubber man, Luffy grinned as he shook Ichigo's hand. And I'm gonna be king of pirates. Quote. Right. Of course, said Ichigo, this must be some weird dream I'm having, good for you, I guess. So where did you come from, Ichigo? Another voice asked him. Ichigo looked down to the owner of the voice. A tanuki. Quote. I'm not a tanuki, I'm a reindeer. The strange creature retorted, suddenly changing form. It grew. Ichigo yelped in surprise at the reindeer's sudden, almost human transformation. Who the hell are you guys anyway? Quote. We're the ones who should be asking you that, stated a girl with lengthily copper hair. Besides, we're the Straw Hat Pirates. Surely you would have heard of us by now. Ichigo shook his head. Nope. Sorry to let you down, but I've never heard of you. You're not from around here, are you? Asked a tall dark-haired woman. Ichigo took in their surroundings to see nothing but ocean. I guess not. He fell from the sky and has weird clothes, observed a muscled boy of about Ichigo's height, though with a long nose. He must be an alien. Really? Shrieked the reindeer-like creature, now back in his smaller form. He must be. He came from the moon. So cool. Luffy cried. Hey moon guy, do ya wanna join us? Quote. This earned him a thump on the head from a well-built green-haired man, who had 3 katanas sheathed into his belt. Why does he need 3 swords? Ichigo wondered, also noting a scar disabling the man's left eye. Idiot. Snapped 3 swords, what have I told you about asking strangers to join us? And weird ones from the sky, no less. The moon, corrected Luffy. I'm not from the moon, Ichigo stated. Maybe he's from a sky island, suggested a blonde-haired, curly-browed man casually as he puffed a cloud of smoke from his cigarette. I agree with you on this one, Cook, nodded 3 swords, I don't think he's an alien. Why don't we just ask him where he's from, the dark-haired woman suggested with a smile. Robin Kwan is so smart tilde. Curly Brow sang as he twisted and twirled, where are you from, Ichigo? Quote. Ichigo quickly ceased glancing questioningly at Curly Brow's twirling and answered. Karakura town. There was silence. It's in Japan. Further silence. Tanuki Deer tilted his head to the side. What's a Japan? Quote. It's one of the most populated countries on Earth. What's an Earth? Quote. Maybe he really is an alien, 3 swords considered with a frown. That's awesome. Quote. I knew it. I was right. Just as you'd all expect of the great Captain Usopp. Quote. If they've never heard of Japan or Earth, thought Ichigo worriedly, as Luffy, Tanuki Deer, Long Nose, Curly Brow, Long Skeleton and Machine Speedo Guy, pretty much everyone but Zoro, Nami and Robin carried on like a bunch of excited, scared and emotional idiots. Maybe I really am an alien. Wait a moment, a strange reality dawned on Ichigo, you guys can see me. Quote. Yes. Even though I don't have eyes. Long Skeleton supplied. Are aliens meant to be invisible or something? Machine Speedo Guy asked. I suppose if they get invisibility boosters somehow. He's so cool. Luffy shouted, before running over to 3 swords, Zoro. Can we keep him? Please, he's so strange. Quote. Ichigo wasn't sure how to react to the unintentional insult. Don't ask me. Besides, you and Brook are much stranger. Yo ho ho hey. Snapped Long Skeleton, whom Ichigo guessed was Brook. He agreed with 3 swords though. Why don't we just drop him off at the next island? Suggested Curly Brow, he's probably best off making his own way from there. Ichigo liked the idea. The sooner he escaped the ship of weirdos, the better. But first, how did you get here, alien? Asked Long Nose. Well, began Ichigo, realizing he once again had the attention of the entire crew. Maybe it was something to do with that Garganta. The what? Quote. Ichigo went on to explain to the crew how he'd gotten there, the initial fight with Grimmjow, falling through Urahara's training room and Garganta, before realizing. Zanjutsu. He almost shouted, climbing up onto the rail. Leaving already? Luffy pouted. I have to get my Zanpakto, Ichigo explained. Your what? Quote. My sword. I was chasing it but got distracted when Luffy fell in. I better get him now. He was about to jump in, when Machine Speedo Guy stopped him. Does the sword happen to look like a huge cleaver? Quote. Ichigo paled, a sick, nagging sensation bugging him from within. Yeah, why? Quote. Well, just after the captain shouted about a man being overboard, a sea king went past just below deck. It had that sword in its mouth, bro. Quote. I saw that too, the dark-haired woman realized. Ichigo wasn't completely sure what a sea king was, but it didn't sound too good. Zanjetsu, he said, dropping to his knees. He could feel the reiatsu of his Zanpakto, though it was far off now, hence the odd feeling that was coming upon him. The sound of footsteps swiftly approached him, and Ichigo looked up to see Luffy gazing solemnly down at him. Your sword is your treasure, Luffy began, removing his straw hat and dusting it off, but you had to stop chasing it so you could save me from the water, and now a sea king has taken it. Ichigo wasn't quite sure where this was going. To repay you, we won't be dropping you off at any next island. From this moment until you get your treasure back, you're traveling with us. Quote. There were mixed reactions from the crew. I'm indebted to him, so we don't have any choice, Luffy told them, as he re-hatted his head. Besides, he won't stay with us forever like a Nakama or anything. Just for now, he turned back to Ichigo and smiled. You're coming with us, Moon Guy. Ichigo wasn't sure if this was a good or bad thing, but was sure he'd find out soon enough. What have I gotten myself into this time? Chapter 2. Glade of the Gate. Sailing with the Straw Hats was an entire experience in of itself. It had been 2 days since Ichigo's fateful mishap through the Garganta and into the strange world of the pirates, and never had he wished so much for dry land, or somewhere larger than the confinements of the ship. That stretchy kid, Luffy, didn't seem to understand that Ichigo actually had a proper name, constantly referring to him as Moon Guy. Ichigo hoped the name would not stick. He had quickly learned of the reason Luffy couldn't swim, and that he never would be able to. He'd eaten a devil's fruit or something like that. It had given him those stretching powers, but made him useless in the water. And Luffy wasn't the only one. The Tanuki, the skeleton and the tall dark-haired woman had eaten devil's fruits as well, giving them their own quirks and abilities. And apparently there were several other fruit users in this world, all with a wide variety of powers, though with a common weakness to water. This only made Ichigo question Luffy's intelligence further. If he had had the power of the Gomu Gomu no Mi for so long, then wouldn't he be used to the fact he couldn't swim, and not just go jumping off the side of the ship? Some things would forever be a mystery. What surprised Ichigo, however, was the age of Luffy, just over 2 years older than he was. Whilst Ichigo had turned 18 a few months earlier, Luffy was 20 before even that. Ichigo shook his head. It made no sense. Hey Moon Guy. The now familiar voice yelled joyously across the ship's deck, check this out. Quote. Ichigo glanced up from the map he was observing, to see Luffy standing by the rails and holding up a strange-looking fish. Look what I caught. Luffy grinned, isn't it awesome? Quote. What the hell is that? Questioned Ichigo, as the strange fish thing flopped down onto the deck and began flailing. I don't know, but it's dinner. Luffy replied, before leaping down onto the fish and calling for Sanji, hey Sanji. Food. Quote. Ichigo shrugged and continued looking down at the map. The fish looked weird, but maybe it would taste alright. After all, if Sanji could make that weird squid thing into a nice dinner last night, this fish would be fine. Over the past 2 days, Ichigo had gotten to know most of the crew well enough. Well, most of their names at least. Except Three Swords, he could never quite remember that guy's name. The guy didn't seem to trust him that much either. So far over his stay he had been given a tour of the ship, the Thousand Sunny it was called, several times. The first time was not long after he had arrived and had been legitimately interesting. Cyborg Speedo guy, Frankie, had taken him along and shown him various rooms, and spoken of the ship's design as he was the one who had built it. The next tour had been led by none other than Luffy and had consisted of a great deal of time spent in the kitchen, trying to break into the fridge. Eventually, Sanji had come along and booted them out. Next Chopper had taken him along, and shown him where the medical room was. The next 3 times were Luffy again, showing him random sights and always ending up somewhere in the kitchen. The next time was just like the previous 3 times, only this time Usopp came along as well, and they were soon joined by Brook in rolling up and down the deck for no apparent reason as Ichigo looked on in confusion. It had been at dinner that first night, not long after crash landing into the world of ocean, that Ichigo had elaborated on his situation. "So you're in a spirit form at the moment?" Nami had asked. "Yeah, I'm a substitute Shinigami," Ichigo explained, "that's why I was surprised you could see me." "Ooh, so you're a ghost?" asked Luffy. Not quite, but something like that I guess." "Urgish. He's a ghost," Brook yelped, arising from his seat and backing away. "Well, you're a skeleton," Ichigo pointed out. "Yeah. Don't say it like that." Quote. Since then, Ichigo had become more accustomed to life on the ship, although it would take a long time to get used to, if ever. He'd been given a different pair of clothes. The Shinigami robes were apparently not convenient for daily ship life. He now wore a gray-colored, loose pair of pants and a button-up dark cotton shirt with 3/4 sleeves. Right now, he was watching as Luffy and Sanji wrestled the fish. "It's a very good fish." Luffy smiled happily, sitting on the aquatic creature as Sanji went to open the aquarium. "Mind if I try some when it's ready?" Ichigo asked. "No. It's mine. Go and find your own." "That's not fair." Quote. However, Luffy was already hurrying with the fish to the aquarium. "Idiot," Ichigo muttered as he stood, folded up the map and ascended the stairs, to where Nami sat. Sensing him approach, Nami looked over and smiled, "Done." Quote. "Yes," Ichigo nodded as he handed it back to her. "It's good, but definitely isn't the world I'm from." "Didn't think it would be. I'm not an alien though." "I never thought you were," Nami assured him as she took a sip from her drink. "Don't mind the others. They're very excitable and have a habit of acting up. A lot of the time it seems like Robin, me and sometimes Zoro are surrounded by a bunch of idiots." "That probably isn't far from the truth, Nami-san," Ichigo admitted as they watched Frankie flaunt the disco function in his nipple lights to an amazed Chopper. "Yes, it's true that the boys are quite boisterous at times," came a deep female voice as Robin approached and took a seat beside Nami, before picking up the book she'd been reading, "but it keeps this ship lively. Otherwise we might all be killed by boredom." There was silence as the tall woman effortlessly flicked through the pages, quickly finding the place she was up to. "What are you reading about?" asked Ichigo out of curiosity. "Legends," she replied simply, "more specifically, some of the legends associated with islands around this area, as well as ruins that may support evidence that they were more than just legends." Ichigo pondered, intrigued. "So, what kinds?" Quote. "There's meant to be a collection of interesting islands around here," Robin explained. "I'm not so sure, but some may contain poneglyphs, maybe they can answer some questions." "Okay. Ichigo wasn't so sure what a poneglyph was, but it sure sounded smart. Maybe they were animals of some sort. Yeah, that was probably it. Some sort of zoology-related thing. Robin seemed like the kind of intelligent woman who'd be into that sort of thing. Or perhaps it was a person's name. Or a type of person. Yes, that had to be it. So who's poneglyph? Ichigo asked casually. He received a snigger of laughter from Robin in response. Ah, Nami face-palmed, you're an idiot too. Quote. Huh. Ichigo retaliated as Robin took a sip from her drink to hide her otherwise obvious mirth. Nami ignored him, looking down at the log post secured around her slender wrist. We should be reaching the next island sometime soon. Ichigo approached the ship's bow, slumping against the rail, arms crossed over the edge, and squinted out to the horizon. Is that the island? He asked after a few moments' pause, indicating to a blurred shape in the distance emerging above the water slightly. It grew as they sailed closer, a lone isle of land in an otherwise expansive ocean. Nami gave a nod. It's in the direction the log pose is pointing. The climate suggests there's something over there as well. I guess we should let the others know and prepare to disembark. The island was chilly and damp. It was dense with forest and plant life, and many puddles and swamps dotted its expanse. As the Sunny docked into a bay, a musty aroma wafted from the ground, and Ichigo began to doubt the island was inhabited. Well then, Luffy grinned happily as he made for the ship's exit. Come on, Moon Guy. I'll take you for a tour. How can you take him for a tour if you've never been here before? Nami demanded, but was ignored as Ichigo muttered, yeah, sure, and followed Luffy anyway. They're both morons. Nami shook her head, before turning to the rest of the crew. You guys know what to do, she instructed, meet back here before dark. And no getting lost. What are you looking at me for, Witch? Zoro demanded upon the last comment. Just past experience. That's all, Nami explained, as Zoro was attacked by an enraged cook for addressing his, Nami Swan Tilda, in such a manner. Nami ignored the ruckus, gazing down at the log pose as Robin approached. It shouldn't take too long to set, she said to the taller woman, we can probably leave by early tomorrow. Robin nodded, I'll go and see if I can find anything interesting here for the time being. With that, she followed the path of Luffy and Ichigo, exiting the ship. It wasn't long before she was joined by Frankie. You'll be accompanying me, Frankie. You might get bored. I won't get bored, the cyborg responded, flexing his mechanical joints. I just feel like walking on land for a bit. The Sunny is a great ship, but if you don't go onto the land sometimes, then that's not super at all. Luffy strolled along the coastline of the odd island, Ichigo in tow as he took his time to observe many interesting and cool things. Ichigo was highly perplexed as to how someone could find practically everything so amusing. The boy would chatter away about something or rather, sometimes pausing to gape or coon at something he'd find, before excitedly dragging Ichigo along to another part of the island to simultaneously explore and guide. Ooh, look at these. Quote. Luffy's rubbery hands simultaneously shot forward to a nearby berry bush, where they wrapped themselves around two fresh bunches and tugged, intent on a snack. Ichigo quickly put out a hand to stop him. Those might be poisonous. Do you wanna die? Quote. Why would they be poisonous? Luffy pouted. The tree is growing them here so that people can come and have something to eat if they're hungry. Why else would they be there? Quote. Are you serious? Ichigo asked. Just because they're edible it doesn't mean they're safe to eat. That would be like wearing a bra or skirt or something just because it's clothing. Luffy contemplated this for a while, frowning slightly. Judging by the strain in his simple features, Ichigo could see the boy was putting a lot of thought into the statement. "Hey now, don't hurt yourself," Ichigo warned him sternly but not unkindly. "I know you probably don't think often, but when you do, you should put it into things that most people don't usually need to think about. Not jumping into the sea when you've never been able to swim, for example." Luffy's frown deepened for a moment, and Ichigo became slightly worried he'd offended him. That was, until the older boy noticed something that stole his attention, and began chasing after a defenseless fury animal and expressing his desires to eat it. Ellipsis. After about an hour of aimlessly wandering, the two happened across a large swamp surrounded by an embankment of trees. "Hey Moon Guy, I wonder what this is," said Luffy as he stretched his rubbery arm into something that strikingly resembled some sort of beehive. "Wait." Ichigo tried to stop him, but to no avail. To Luffy's disappointment, the hive plumped to the ground. And a swarm of dangerous-looking neon-colored insects emerged looking as pissed off as a swarm of angry feathered insects. Luffy oohed with delight. "Look at the colors," he exclaimed, "and are those feathers on the wings? So cool." Quote. "Crap," breathed Ichigo, wincing at the sight of the large stingers attached to each of the insects' abdomens. Luffy seemed to be on the verge of reaching out to pet one of them when Ichigo yanked him sideways, rolling his eyes. "You made them angry. Run, damn it." Quote. "Yosh." Quote. And with that, Ichigo and Luffy ran as fast as they could from the dangerous swarm, Luffy's laughter competing with the insects' thrumming harmony for dominance. The two ran through the marshlands, overturning stones and stumbling in ditches. The pounding of their fast and swift footsteps prompting muffled squelching sounds from the soft ground. "Stupid ground," Luffy thought, "it's so hard to run over. Why is Moon Guy so far ahead?" It was true, the substitute Shinigami was practically gliding over the ground, almost without touching it at all. "Not fair," Luffy shouted, gaining more speed as he barraged through the light forest as he pushed his legs harder regardless of what was in his way and intent on catching up with his adventure partner. "I'll beat you, Moon Guy." Quote. Zoro surveyed the island's coast through narrowed eyes. Something seemed odd about this place. Though in his 22 years in this world, he'd seen many odd things. So much so that the odd had become the ordinary. So the island's oddness didn't strike him at all as anything peculiar as he continued strolling in whichever direction he felt like taking. Which was probably the opposite of whichever direction he thought he was going, and he would inevitably become hopelessly lost before long. Some things never change. He came to a sudden halt as the ground around him trembled. "What is this?" he said to himself, as a small section of the ground split slightly, a puddle of water expanding from its cavity. He quickly evaded it, before the entire swamp ahead of him began to quaver and shake. Some way off, closer to the sunny, the rumbling was also apparent. An earthquake? Sanji pondered as Usopp went flying past him. Brook began panicking, yelling something about being too young to die, before cracking one of his skull jokes, and Chopper had defensively gone into guard point, in which he was being bounced mercilessly along the ground. Back with Zoro, the water was now cascading from the ground at a fluent speed. But then, as quickly as the rumbling started, all was silent. "Whoa," Luffy panted as he caught up with Ichigo, whom was standing by a mossy tree stump. "You're so fast, Moon Guy." Quote. "I guess I would be," Ichigo figured, "I'm still in my Shinigami form after all. Even if I don't have Zangetsu." "Ha ha ha, you're weird." "What?" How am I weird compared to you? Quote. Ha 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 ha. Quote. However, the two's arguing was interrupted by an approaching hum of 10,000 pissed-off insects as they closed in on the clearing. I thought we'd lost them. Ichigo groaned. Ooh, Luffy chuckled at Ichigo's reaction, maybe we should talk to them. Quote. That's stupid. They'd sting us. Maybe if we go up this tree they won't get us, Ichigo suggested. Good idea, Moon Guy. Strange, Robin frowned. What? Frankie asked her. The tide's here. It's strange, although the moon is full, the shoreline seems to be at low tide, she indicated to the receding debris line in the sand. Normally when there's a full moon, we shouldn't be able to see this line of debris. Frankie observed the shoreline as he took in what Robin said. What do you think it means? He asked. I'm not sure, Robin responded, but in this part of the New World, I've read that the islands can be more extreme than those in other parts of the Grand Line. Perhaps some of these islands combat the laws of this world. What's that? Frankie asked, indicating to a stone-like sculpture just by the shore. As Robin approached it, she could make out a construction not unlike a sundial, with foreign markings marred around its base. Poneglyph markings? Frankie asked. Robin nodded. I don't think this is working, Moon Guy. Ichigo and Luffy were squashed up extremely close in the topmost branch of a tall tree, watching as the swarm simply wove its way up towards them. Well, what do you want me to do about it? Snapped Ichigo. Nothing, replied Luffy, just sit there and wait while I go and kick these birds' asses. Birds? Ichigo questioned. Sure, they have small feathers on their wings, but you do realize they're wasps or bees, right? No beaks or talons, a stinger on their butt, and they came out of a hive. But Luffy was already rocketing down the tree's trunk to confront the swarm of alleged birds. Idiot! Hollered Ichigo, you'll get stung. Quote. Not if I have Moon Guy with me. Quote. Quote. Ichigo was taken by surprise as a long, lanky limb stretched high up and secured itself around his wrist. There was a short pause in which Ichigo only had time to look at the hand gripping said wrist and gulp, before the long arm retracted itself and sent Ichigo plummeting towards its owner. You said I could stay up there. Ichigo complained as the two rocketed towards the plume of insects. Changed my mind, Tilda. Luffy grinned. Ichigo grimaced as he sighted the thousands of insects headed their way. Don't tell me those were all in the hive, he stuttered in shock, no way they would all fit. Quote. Maybe they invited some friends to chase us, Luffy suggested. Who cares? They're too small, how do you plan on attacking them? Unless you have a can of bug spray or something. Luffy grinned. Don't worry, Moon Guy, it will be alright. I'll kick these birds' asses. I don't have a bounty of 400 million berry for nothing. Really? How much can you get for that? A loaf of bread. Quote. Ha ha ha. You're funny, Moon Guy. Quote. Ichigo bit back his argument and dodged as the wave of insects glided haphazardly over his head. What are they doing? A strange and shrill horn sounded throughout the forest from no apparent location. What was that sound? Ichigo wondered, before the mass wave of insects buzzed away all at once. Maybe it was their call for dinner, Luffy considered. Good idea. I'm hungry, we should go and find Sanji and get him to make us something. We can find the birds again tomorrow. Heck no. Well, if you want to play with the birds, then go right ahead, but leave me out next time. Quote. Luffy laughed and crashed through the forest back in the direction of the ship. Sanji. He called out, time to cook that weird fish. Quote. Meanwhile, Tatsuki absent-mindedly sketched on her notepad as the teacher lectured the class on something, or rather. A quick glance across the room to Orihime proved she was staring out the window yet again. Scanning the direction of her friend's stare, Tatsuki quickly sighted the blue-haired man whom was still hovering a ways above Karakura town, pacing through the air as though waiting for something. He's been up there nearly 3 days, she thought to herself, wonder what he's doing. And without a second thought, she returned to her work. Author's note. Disclaimer to cover entire story because I am lazy. One Piece belongs to Eiichiro Oda and Bleach belongs to Tite Kubo, but we all know that. Is it even necessary to make a disclaimer on this site? I mean, it is fanfiction after all, and I'm clearly not Oda or Kubo. Chapter 3. In which Sanji remembers the need to buy carrots. Breakfast, not unlike the previous few mornings, was not a dull affair. Are you sure you didn't feel it? Chopper asked Ichigo and Luffy, eyes wide as the latter busily inhaled his breakfast, as well as some of those on the plates around him. No, we felt nothing, Ichigo answered. We probably didn't notice it because we spent most of our time running from the insect's genius here provoked. Slamming a pint of orange juice down on the table's surface, Luffy whipped his mouth with his sleeve and grinned. Shee-hee-hee, you were so funny, Moon Guy, running from those birds. They were insects. Ichigo snapped, we've been through this already. Yeah, you have, Usopp said with a yawn, neither of you would shut up about it last night. One moment Luffy was talking about how you were sort of flying and how cool it was, next you're arguing about insects and birds. Don't act like you had no part, Sanji said, coming past and nimbly kicking the sniper over the head. You were arguing with them just as loud. It was impossible to get any sleep. Quote, I slept fine, Zoro said flatly with a yawn. I wasn't asking you. The cook retorted, turning to kick Zoro. Blocking the kick with a sword sheath, the swordsman countered, and very soon the two were having their traditional breakfast brawl, complete with the countless exchanging of blows and endearing nicknames. Ichigo looked on, not yet entirely accustomed to the two's antics, but returned his attention to Chopper as the small doctor continued his recount of the strange earthquake. Frankie and I didn't feel anything where we were, Robin contributed as she took a sip from her coffee and flicked through the book she'd been reading. You didn't? Chopper asked, looking puzzled. Nothing, Chopper bro, Frankie affirmed from by the fridge where he was fueling himself with cola. Well, it was definitely felt over here, said Nami, as Brooke shuddered beside her. It scared me half to death. The skeleton exclaimed, though I'm already dead, yo-ho-ho-ho. Quote. Ichigo facepalmed as Luffy and Usopp cackled at Brooke's joke. Nami frowned. Zoro felt it too, wherever he happened to be at that point. Which could have been anywhere. It was well after dark before he managed to find the ship again. But this always happens when he goes off on his own. In fact, I'm surprised he found the ship again at all. Are you implying something? Zoro growled as he and Sanji narrowly avoided smashing the bench to pieces. As a result, he earned a kick to the gut from Sanji, sending him through the next wall and causing Frankie to give them a lecture about repairs and to please do their fighting outside or there'd be trouble, whilst Nami murmured something that sounded a lot like, "This is why we can't have nice things." Ichigo smirked and shook his head. He still couldn't believe these were pirates. He almost tuned out, when a distinguishable voice jerked him to his senses. Hey, Moon Guy. Quote. He let out a sigh, before mimicking Luffy's tone in his reply. What, Luffy? Quote. No need to yell tilde. What? You did it first. Quote. You're doing it again, hee hee. When Ichigo simply raised an eyebrow, Luffy continued. Usopp, Chopper and I are gonna go exploring again. Wanna come? Quote. No, Ichigo grumbled, placing his head on the bench in front of him. Ah, why not? Luffy pouted, walking over and poking Ichigo's cheek. You're being boring. I had enough exploring yesterday, Ichigo retorted. Luffy continued pouting and mumbling incomprehensible, disjointed sentences as he left the room. Ichigo sighed once again and banged his head against the counter a few times, trying to keep his sanity in check. You'll get used to it, Robin said with a smile. Oh, I forgot you were there, Ichigo said, blushing slightly with embarrassment as he quickly sat straight. The room's still full, Ichigo. We haven't gone anywhere, Nami said, though it's a lot quieter with Sanji and Zoro outside and the other three gone. I think Frankie went too. The room's a lot emptier without him and all his modifications. Robin laughed and stood. I should get back to what I was doing before, she said, leaving the room. Well then, Brook said, looking across from Nami to Ichigo, so Ichigo-kun doesn't go thinking he's the only one in here and do something questionable. How about some music? Quote. Go ahead, Nami said, standing. I'm going to go and take a quick look at the coast. I'm sure I'll hear it from down there. Oh, and Nami-san? Brook prompted just as her hand reached the doorknob. Before you go, may I see your panties? Quote. Ichigo blinked, watching as Nami responded by growling and hurling the nearest chair at the perverted skeleton, before storming off angrily. He continued staring as Brook shrugged in defeat and strode over to the grand piano, plonked himself down and began playing a complex, yet optimistic piece. Who was going to do something questionable? Ichigo asked no one in particular. Whoa. Luffy, Usopp and Chopper stood on a rock overlooking the island around the Sunny in much amazement. Amazing, Luffy observed, the ground peed itself overnight. Quote. Yeah, it looks like it took a leak, Usopp agreed. There's so many puddles, Chopper jigged excitedly. Let's throw rocks in them. Quote. Yeah. Quote. Meanwhile, not that far off, the mysterious puddles had also not gone unnoticed. There's a lot more water here than there was yesterday, Frankie remarked as he approached the archaeologist, whom had continued to study the strange sundial poneglyph for the past half hour. Robin nodded, examining the strange markings at the base of the structure. This here, could this mean? To answer her question, a sudden tremor worked its way up the coast, causing the puddles to widen and water to spurt out of cracks in the soil. However, as quick as it had come, it stopped again. Robin drew herself to her full height, quickly heading back in the direction she'd come. I saw what I needed to see, she quickly explained, as another slightly more violent tremor began. What is it? Frankie asked. Robin looked up into his eyes and spoke, a trace of urgency in her voice. We need to get off this island and back to the Sunny. Now. Damn it, thought Ichigo as he, the swordsman and the cook jogged as fast as they could across the ever-dampening island. Where could they have gotten to? Robin and Frankie had arrived back to the Sunny just in time to warn those on board and nearby of the island's sinking tendencies, before another earthquake had occurred which sent Ichigo, Sanji and Zoro in search of the three explorers. Maybe they're this way, Zoro suggested, taking the lead. If we follow you, we'll never get back. Sanji retaliated, swinging a kick at the swordsman's head. Zoro made a swipe back at Sanji, before Ichigo interrupted. I know where they might be. Sure enough, a 3-minute journey to the swamp from the previous day, now a lot fuller, proved the three explorers to be having the time of their lives, and totally oblivious to the sinking land around them. Ah! Luffy smiled broadly when he saw them. Zoro. Sanji. Moon Guy. Did you come to look at the island's piss? Quote. The what? Quote. But there wasn't time. A sharp tremor reached the swamp, causing Chopper to yelp and almost surgically attach himself to the nearest thing, which just happened to be the side of Ichigo's head. Usopp to say something about wanting to go back to the boat illness, and Luffy to find the thing he'd been undoubtedly searching for. Hey, I found the bird's nest. Quote. Mid trying to get Chopper off, Ichigo looked over just in time to witness Luffy putting his fist through yet another hive. Idiot! He shouted, running just as the water level of the swamp and surrounding puddles began to rise at a rocketing pace. However, it seemed that even Luffy agreed it was time to go when a large plume of water shot up from the swamp, and he was grabbed by Sanji to avoid being sucked into the rising water. Quickly, the group hurried back in the direction of the boat as water began splashing around them. With the thousand sunny in sight, the water reached Ichigo's knees and the land beneath them continued to sink further. Sanji. Ichigo barely heard Luffy from somewhere to his left, can't move. Various splashes sounded a way off, as the insects dove in and out of the water and developed fin-like attachments, seemingly unfazed by the phenomena. Sanji quickly hoisted his captain over a shoulder front ways as all land between themselves and the sunny disappeared. You're out of the water, rocket us there. Yash. Gomu Gomu no. Ichigo looked on in amazement as both Luffy's arms swiftly rocketed forth, securing themselves on the ship's rails some 100 meters away. Quick everyone, grab hold. The cook instructed. To what? You. Zoro scoffed. Just do it. Sanji snapped, and the swordsman grudgingly complied. Not entirely sure of the plan, Ichigo took a place beside Usopp, made sure the reindeer was still firmly attached to his head, which wasn't that hard. Chopper was stronger than he looked and the force was starting to hurt, and held on tight. No sooner had he grabbed hold of Sanji's arm, however, he found himself and the others flying through the air and directly towards the Sunny's deck. He would have heard Luffy's resounding cry of, "Rocket," had Chopper not been blocking his ears by this point. Thump. Oof. Quote. You made it. Nami smiled at the 6 figures sprawled across the deck. Luffy laughed as the Sunny sailed away from the quickly sinking island. That was fun. Quote. Fun. Ichigo stammered, prying Chopper from his head, you could have drowned. Quote. But Luffy was having too much fun running up the deck to watch the last of the island as it submerged. Well, said Robin, watching Luffy laugh off his adrenaline rush, that was an interesting little endeavor. What did you find out? Nami asked. It seems that island was the first of a ring of islands we are entering, Robin explained. It is also, as we discovered, a sinking island. Sinking island? Ichigo questioned, mouth agape. Rare but not unheard of, Robin continued. They spend a few days above the water's surface before sinking back down suddenly for a few more. The wildlife has adapted a semi-aquatic lifestyle so to easily live within both environments, on land and below the water. How is it possible? Chopper wondered. Tectonic placement, Usopp contributed, because they're near cracks in the plates where the ocean floor is constantly moving and shifting. I learned something about it during those 2 years. Wouldn't surprise me if there's some volcanoes on the next islands. Whoa, really? Chopper asked in amazement as the sniper went into a ramble about how the great Captain Usopp had conquered many said volcanoes. He's smart. Ichigo was surprised, but shrugged it off, just as Luffy joined the conversation. Ooh, I see. So they're mystery islands. No, Luffy, Nami said straightly. Usopp's explanation was right on. The tides, however, she wandered over to the ship's rails and looked out to where the island two recently sat, a warm ocean breeze fumbling at her long loose copper locks. I'm not sure if it has something to do with the Grand Line or the New World or something else, but the tides there totally stumped me. It was like the gravitational pull of the moon was warped or something. Anyway, the next island is really close. Looking to her wrist, she observed the log pose. We should be there by sunset if we make good time. Luffy, can you secure the sails with Zoro? Quote. Yash. Quote. As Nami departed up to the steering wheel, Luffy ran to do his job. As the young pirate busily got to work on the sails, the motion tugged at the fabric of the 3/4 red shirt he wore, causing Ichigo to see something he hadn't noticed before. A large scar dictated prominence over his torso, stretching across the flesh in 4 sharp points. Ichigo frowned, wondering why he hadn't taken it into account before. It was pretty damn noticeable. That's a decent scar, looks like it would have hurt. I wonder how he got it. He's an idiot, but I doubt a wound like that could happen from just mucking around. I haven't seen these guys in action yet, but from what I guess they'd be kinda strong. Ichigo shrugged. Scars were to be expected though, right? He'd seen that Zoro guy had a pretty impressive one across his chest, and Ichigo himself still had a few. Sure, Orihime could easily heal them, but some he liked to keep as reminders of past battles and motives to get stronger. He sat back for a bit, pondering the situations in which the other two had obtained theirs, before being whisked away by Chopper and Usopp, who were intent on a game of tag. Ah, such a nice day to do the shopping. Quote. Kazuki was enjoying himself as he wove through the aisles of one of Karakura Town's various supermarkets, leaning his weight on the trolley as he pushed it and picked up the essentials. Content with his grocery adventure, he reached the checkout, paid for the items and continued on his way. He wasn't outside for long before he crossed paths with an old friend. Ah, Isshin. He waved to the once retired Shinigami and crossed the cobblestone path. How have you been? Quote. Kazuki. Good to see you, Isshin greeted in return, been pretty well lately. And yourself? Quote. As good as ever tilde, Urahara responded cheerfully. Isshin grinned. How's Ichigo doing by the way? Quote. A confused look crossed Urahara's face. Why are you asking me that? He questioned, you're his father. But hasn't he been training or doing some sort of job for you? Isshin pressed further. I haven't seen him in about a week, Urahara said with a frown. I haven't felt his reiatsu either. I suppose he's gone to the Soul Society, but I haven't opened the Dongai for him. Maybe he went with one of the Shinigami. Isshin sighed. Khan has had to fill in for him at school these past couple of days. He hasn't told anyone where he's gone this time round either, not even you. He can't just waltz off to Soul Society without telling anyone just because he has his powers back. Isshin comically folded his arms. When he gets home, he's grounded. Quote. Urahara snickered, before impulsively looking up to the sky and sighting a familiar blue-haired Arankar. Hey. Grimjow. Quote. Grimjow ceased his pacing and looked down on the two men. What is it? He demanded. Can't you see I'm busy? Quote. Doing what? Urahara countered. Waiting for that damned Kurosaki. He's had me waiting here for him for 4 days, because he was stupid and let go of that ridiculous Zanpakto of his and had to go after it. Quote. 4 days ago, Isshin commented, that was the last morning I saw him. Have any Shinigami come through since then? Any Gargantas or Senkaimons? Quote. Urahara shook his head. The only thing that could have sent Ichigo elsewhere since he saw Grimmjow was that Garganta eye. It was then that it hit him. Urahara's pale complexion paled even more as he pieced it all together. Grimmjow and Ichigo's sparring match had been 3 nights previously, precisely when he'd last opened the Garganta. There'd been a sound from near the Garganta in that brief time he's had his back turned. And the next day, Urahara had discovered a broken air vent in the ceiling, almost as though it had been broken through. Urahara, Isshin asked, where have you sent my son? Quote. Oh dear. Ichigo lazed back, leaning most of his weight on the sturdy wooden deck wall behind him. Looking down, he examined his attire. He now wore a navy blue, half-buttoned up 3/4 shirt and long black, easy-to-move-in pants. Had it not been for the full-bring remnants that resembled gloves and a collar on his hands and neck, he'd forget he was still technically in his Shinigami form even more often than he already had. Speaking of which, he still had no idea how the hell everyone could see him in this form. It wasn't like his own body was available for him though. Heck, that body wasn't even in the same world. Ichigo sighed, hoping Khan wouldn't be getting up to anything too stupid. Which in itself raised another question. Once he finally reobtained Zangetsu, how was he going to get back? Though that was the least of his worries right now. Zangetsu came first, and he'd worry about the other things later. As long as I can still sense him, Ichigo thought, sensing the blade someplace far off. Oi! Ichigo! Jolted from his thoughts, Ichigo looked over to see the swordsman staring his way. He opened his mouth to respond, but hesitated. Ah crap, he thought, what's Three Swords' actual name again? Damn, why can't I ever remember these things? Was it Zola? No, Zimbu. I don't think it was. Was it Zerf? Maybe not. Seamus. Quote. It's Zoro, you dork. I knew that. Ichigo tilted his head slightly, as he eyed the green-haired man. Then why isn't he Mexican? In turn, Zoro tilted his own head as eyed the orange-haired teen. I hope not everyone from his world isn't as dense as he is. How's the training going, Seamus? Came Sanji's voice as the cook watched them from up the stairs. He was leaning his arms against the rails, looking down from them and grinning. A wisp of smoke blew from his cigarette gently wavered in the wind. Obviously he'd been onlooking, and in amusement so it seemed. Shut up, shit cook, Zoro snapped, before turning back to Ichigo, distracting himself from Sanji's sniggering. Great, now look what you've got him calling me. Oops, said Ichigo, my bad, Scott. Zoro. Right. Quote. And what's with that ridiculous colored hair? Zoro ridiculed him. What? Ichigo retaliated, you're having a go at me for my hair. Have you checked your own recently? At least my hair is a somewhat natural color. Quote. This is a natural hair color. Zoro snapped, quickly ruffling his short algae hair for emphasis, it's my natural color. Quote. Sanji observed the odd exchanging of words from the upper deck, seemingly unfazed. The cook mused, eyes darting between the two as he observed the clash vibrant orange and green whilst stroking at his stubble, a carrot. What was that, shit cook? Quote. I just remembered I need to get some carrots at the next island for tonight's stew, Sanji said, turning and making his way back to the kitchen with a smirk, thanks for reminding me. He entered the kitchen and closed the door behind him with a soft, Thud. Zoro and Ichigo exchanged a moment of silence as they started at the location the cook recently stood, before returning their focus to each other. "I don't get it," Ichigo said blankly, before addressing the older man. "So, what did you call me for in the first place?" Quote. Zoro looked confused for a moment, before regaining his lethargically pissed-off composure. "Ah, that's right. You distracted me. I was gonna ask, you use a sword a lot, don't you?" Quote. "Yeah. A big one." Quote. "Yep." Ichigo instinctively held out a palm as a sleek black katana with a deep gray hilt was tossed to him. "What's this for?" he asked. "It's a spare I keep," Zoro explained. "If you're used to handling that cleaver, then this one should be easy." "Well, that cleaver is my Zanpakto, meaning it'd be the most natural weapon for me to use," Ichigo said, as he drew the katana from its sheath and examined it closely. "But thanks, I guess." He looked up to see Zoro retracting his own swords from their sheaths. "I didn't give that to you just to look at," the green-haired man cauterized him. "I know it's nothing like your Zanpak whatever, but I want to see what you can do. Now, train with me." Khan was barely amused. What did Kazuki want this time? And where the heck was Ichigo? Sure, this body had its advantages and all, but the novelty was beginning to wear off. If he had to be stuck in someone's body forever, he'd prefer it not to be Ichigo's. Ichigo had schoolwork and all that other crap. Khan just wanted to laze at home or go out and pick up chicks, not be a subject of one of Kazuki's many disastrous experiments. Khan looked across from his seat in the underground training room to where Grimmjow stood. And why was he here? Though judging by the other's curious body language, he had about as much an idea of what the crazy shopkeeper had installed as Khan did. God forbid Urahara had decided the Karakura razor needed a partner. Speaking of the man, Urahara suddenly appeared above the trapdoor and slid down the long stilts of the ladder, landing firmly on his feet. "Hey there, Tilda," he waved cheerfully at the mod soul in the Urankar. Not, "Hey there." Khan snapped at him, using the most pissed-off Ichigo face he could. "Regardless of whether you talk to us like that or not, you're still going to make us do something weird, humiliating, illegal, or all three. So hurry up and spill. What do you want?" Quote. My, the shopkeeper spoke, his fanning hiding otherwise obvious amusement. "Very jumpy today, aren't we, Karakura razor?" Quote. Khan clenched his teeth at the superhero name, muttering something like, "The things you people put me through," as Grimmjow looked on in bafflement. "I have gathered the two of you here for a task." Kazuki fiddled with a few buttons on a nearby computer, prompting a tearing sound to infect the air accompanied by the unzipping of a garganta. Khan and Grimmjow stared into the void, their expressions curiously indifferent. "So," Grimmjow stated, "where does it lead?" Quote. "Another world," Urahara smiled with an air of mystery. "I have enough evidence to suggest that Ichigo has fallen into it. You see, I've been working on an important project with someone from this world, but it seems there was some sort of intervention and now Ichigo's stuck." "Idiot," Grimmjow scoffed, "serves him right for running off. I want you two to go and get him." "What?" Khan and Grimmjow gaped in resentment at the shopkeeper's request. "Now I know you two don't have a lot in common," Urahara continued, unaffected by his captive's apparent unwillingness, "but you both have a common drive. Khan, if you don't cooperate, you may be stuck in Ichigo's body and forever be subject to my experiments and tests. Grimmjow, you'll never be able to continue your rematch, and will have no one to gloat at. Now do you understand your mission's importance?" Quote. Both Mod Soul and Irankar gulped, and Urahara took this as a sign of victory. Grimjow, the way I have constructed this Garganta is so that spiritual bodies such as those of Shinigami as well as your own will be visible to any entity on the other side without need for a Gigai, so don't be alarmed when the average person can see you. Right, Grimjow mumbled, unfazed. Won't the people be weirded out by this thing though? Khan contemplated, casually sticking a hand through the Irankar's hollow hole, earning himself a punch to the gut. I hate it when people do that, Grimjow fumed, shaking his clenched fist as Khan lay winded and clutching his stomach on the ground. Do you have any idea how weird it feels, Ichigo wannabe? Quote. Urahara laughed at the two before responding to Khan, maybe slightly, though it's safe to say that weirder things probably happen in that world on a daily basis. But you'll probably work that out fairly early on. You'll both still have full use of your powers, though whether you'll need to use them or not I'm not sure. Alright, Khan wheezed as he stood up, so just go in, find Ichigo and bring him back. Sounds easy enough. I might even find some hot babes on the way. Indeed, Urahara affirmed, let me give you a brief rundown on what I know about this world before I send you off. Right on cue and out of nowhere, Tessai appeared with a large whiteboard and Khan half listened as the shopkeeper went through a number of sketches and mentioned stuff about a world of ocean, islands, pirates, giraffes, fruit and a number of other things Khan found irrelevant. One last thing though, Kazuki's tone had turned serious as Khan and Grimjow prepared for their departure. Now what? Grimjow groaned. Don't let your guard down, Kazuki said with a frown. I'm not too sure, but I have this nagging voice in my head telling me that Ichigo falling through the Garganta wasn't so much an accident. I may be wrong, but it seems as though there could be another force interfering from the other side of the Garganta. Right, we'll keep that in mind, said Khan. Now let's go, you electric blue freak. For the hot babes. Quote. Who are you calling freak, you Ichigo wannabe? Grimjow ragged after him as the two raced for the tear in the sky. Urahara and Tessai watched as the Irankar and the Mod Soul jumped up through the Garganta and to whatever island lay below, before it was sealed off. What is it, boss? Tessai asked as Urahara chuckled to himself. Nothing really, the shopkeeper replied, pulling out his fan. It just never occurred to me that things would work out like this. Far below an icy and treacherous ocean, where the water was abysmal, light sparse and nightmarish creatures abundant, a sleek sea king wove its snake-like body through the alien-like plant life and jagged rocky outcroppings. Several lesser sea creatures quickly scurried out of its path, as its tremendous phantom-like presence drowned them where they swam, in and out of various deep-sea currents. It was not phased as boiling bubbles of air were churned from the field of several small underwater volcanoes it passed over, nor from the large foreboding, harrowing eyes that watched it from somewhere within the darkness. It was clear to all that this Sea King had a prime destination set in mind, and judging on the direction the creature was headed, that destination may just have been hell itself. It continued on its way, slinking in the dim darkness and shadows, all the while a large black cleaver-like sword clutched tightly in its firm, locked jaw. The Sea King smoothly winded around a bend, startling a school of deep-sea crabs the size of small cars into the secure sanctuaries of their shells. Reaching the base of an immensely tall underwater cliff, it snaked its way through a fine crevice and into what resembled a vast labyrinth of rocky outcropping and stone. A maze of various tunnels littered the impressive interior, giving it an odd-looking texture not unlike that of Swiss cheese. But the Sea King knew where its destination lay. Locating a smaller tunnel, it wormed its long body through and continued towards the only light present in miles. Eventually, its head broke through the surface and it swam over to a large embankment, which somewhat resembled a large stone chamber, and also contained several tunnels undoubtedly leading to other locations within the huge air bubble cave. Far above the Sea King's head an endlessly long chimney-like structure was nestled somewhere in amongst the various stalagmites and stalactites. It stretched far, far up to the surface and beyond, capturing the smallest fragment of the murky sky. Though given its length and the darkness of the underwater cave, any light it may have emitted went overall unnoticed, even if it were a clear day. Finally reaching its destination, the Sea King slowly rose from the water and placed the large sword onto the otherwise dry embankment. And then came the footsteps. Echoing footsteps bouncing off the walls of the labyrinth-like structure and reminding the Sea King why it was here in the first place. A human figure emerged from within the shadows, though could not be completely observed in the dull light, or until it ceased walking when the sword was at its feet at least. The figure, a man, knelt down and took the large sword into his calloused and scared hands, giving it a quick once-over before smiling slyly at the Sea King in approval. "Ah, very good," he spoke in a smooth baritone. "Zangetsu, the Moon Slayer could be obtained in that window of opportunity that portal was opened. Just as I originally intended." The corners of his mouth turned downwards slightly as he scanned the sword for its connections and located a strange force apparently belonging to its owner, whom seemed to have accidentally entered the world along with it. Though it seems we have an unwanted hindrance to deal with. Unfortunately, this part is over. I hope you enjoyed it. Apologies for all those quotes. Please have a good morning, afternoon, evening or night. See ya next time.